application. I think that most of our colleagues are really respected experts in this field, and I would really like to ask them a basic question to explain to us what are issues, because we've been speaking during the last 20 years about open and closed innovation. So I'm going to ask you very specific questions in terms of Google's open innovation versus Apple's closed innovation. There has been so many related issues in the academic literature. So we can start actually basically from our left side, perhaps from Professor Gershon and then Professor Waldman or each of you. So just feel free to express your opinion on this issue. Thank you.
So good morning, everybody. It's great to be here. I see so many friends and people and colleagues I know from past years, so glad we're here after COVID, so again, wonderful to be here. In answer to your question, I guess I would start with the difference between Apple and any other company, because Apple has always been a very closed system. It's been sort of its own ecosystem that's been part of its success. Not unlike Amazon today, where they basically create a lot of internal systems for themselves. So when you think about Apple, when you think about all the various services that they have in terms of, the music service, in terms of the software program, in terms of the application of the iPhone and everything else in terms of technology, it has always been with the idea that they don't want to necessarily make their system very open to anybody else. And back in the days when there was two types of commuter standards, it was very hard to convert from one to the other. And that's been, Apple's approach from the very, very beginning. In contrast, you have, let's say, Google in terms of Android, in terms of it being a very open system. And it works to a certain extent, but I can remember back in the day there was a case of where Sony Corporation created the original VCR that was a very, very closed system, therefore was not that Sony made that, going way back. And that was an example of a closed system, but it didn't work to their advantage because when everybody else wanted to make the same standard for VCR technology, the other approach was basically more suitable. We find the same thing today with Google. Google is a much more open system, Apple's a much more closed system. But it has an advantage to each of them in terms of what they're capable of doing. I think I'll stop there.
Okay. It's a really interesting question, doesn't it? And one that I have to sort of go along with Rick, this is differentiation. Right? That you're offering people different kinds of opportunities, and that is reflected both in terms of the types of apps that are created for the Android operating system as opposed to the types of apps, and especially the volume of apps that show up in Apple. And if you look at statistics, people that study this stuff, it is the case that Apple's curation gives rise to a lower probability of having malware that shows up from the Apple Store, or the App Store. On the other hand, you end up with a few 100,000, maybe more, fewer apps that are available. And so you're making a different choice, but you're also paying at a different price point. I would point out that the innovation, we can look at the App Store, which Apple did not accidentally invent. That Steve Jobs thought that you could actually download everything directly from the web, work from the web with your iPhone. And it was people that jailbroke the iPhone and started creating apps for it on iOS, sort of opened their eyes. And this as an innovation is something that you can't manage very directly. Right? The ideas came from people outside of Apple, then they were picked up by Apple and said, yeah, we can do something with this. If we look at the app stores, whether it's the Google Play Store or the Apple's App Store, both of them are themselves platforms for innovation. And so they only make money if people can take the iOS, take the operating system, and combine that with the handset for Apple's laptop as well, and use that to create something else in combination with fast internet computing. And so it's creating a combination of general purpose technologies and then putting it out there and letting other people say, what can we do with this? So you end up with things like Uber, right? That people say, well, there's this cars that are sitting around not being used. We can combine that with a smartphone and the internet and advanced computing, that's so we can keep track of things, and we can create a new service with that. And so I think we need to think of these as platforms for innovation, and they live by letting other people innovate with stuff they create. I think I'll stop there.
Okay, thank you very much. You know, in the minutes my colleagues have been talking, I've been asking myself, why am I not able to answer this question? Because I really have not the faintest idea how to share with you something that will be useful. So I will do just this exercise. I will try to share and explain to you why in the last 50 years of my life as chairman of the Portuguese Publishers Association, or member of the board of IMMAA, FIPP, IMMAA, which are the European boards for the publishers. I never in my life spoke, saw, met anyone from April. Yes, in 2007 or 2008, there was a group of European publishers and European associations that thought maybe it is a good idea to call Microsoft. They just had more pink. To call Microsoft and ask them, are you prepared to set up a aggregator that could compete with Google in what concerns the media? And so we did. It was a long story that lasted for almost 1 year of discussions with Microsoft. At the end, as we know from what we have today, nothing came out of those discussions. But in fact, those discussions were there, and I have been discussing during all these years also with Microsoft when it comes to sustainability of the media. Then in 2017 and 2018, prior to the World Media Congress of IMMAA that was held in Portugal, I visited Google again, I visited Facebook, Media Now, and I even thought of discussing with Amazon on how could we develop a think tank where they would be present to discuss with IMMAA and all the other players on this industry, how could we organize ourselves thinking on the sustainability of the media. But again, Apple was not in my thoughts, not even in my thoughts. It didn't exist. And no, I had a meeting in the United Nations with the Secretary General and the Deputy Secretary General that raised the questions to discuss with them the possibility of an international declaration about the media. If you want to know, I even met an envoy of the Pope to discuss this matter. But never I thought about it. The only relationship I can tell you, and with this I finish, I have 4 sons. They are between 42 to 49 years old. One of my sons, the eldest one, is an able addict. He is different from the other 3. The other 3 and myself, we are good. When something comes to Apple, we said, my son is called Andrew. Oh, let's call Andrew. What do you think? What do you know about this thing of Apple? He answers. He always said, you are all wrong. I'm using the best system. I'm using the best solutions, the best apps. So you don't understand anything about this, and he works every day on solutions about apps. He's the only one from the fact of us. But in fact, and I'm sorry to say this, but this is absolutely true. This is the only thing I could share with you about this idea of looking to go with more open innovation, which we can discuss later, because as it was told, I was during 3 years the chairman of the DNI, Digital News Initiative Fund for Europe, so you can can discuss on that a little bit if you want later. But on this question, really, I'm very, very sorry, but I am very clearly to say to you, I have no answer.
Yeah, then hello from my side as well, and thank you for inviting me on this illustrious panel. Just to add on what Joao was saying, I think maybe it's more like a continuum, and not that is very open and that is totally closed, because if you look at Google, when they started Android, there was a consortium where they had maybe the main playing role, and today it's their operating system. So they also know how to the sets they really want to have to get a bit more ownership on that one. And on the second thing I wanted to say, if you talk about Apple, that's a good thing. Open and closed doesn't really mean that it's an open system gives you more revenues, because if you look at publishers, most would say that they earn more in the closed Apple ecosystem, or right now with advertising solutions trying to launch or starting to launch, that the revenue is higher relative to the more open system. So for media companies, I guess that's also a challenge to navigate this. And the third thing, and then I'll stop, is that maybe it's not so important if it's open or closed. If you're very, very small or not so significant, and I guess for media companies, that's an eye-opener. So it used to be we are the Washington Post, we are whatever, we are RTL, and right now these are large companies, but they are not so large as they are in the media context. And then whatever system you're on, the leverage you have of influencing even open systems maybe is much, much lower than in a media system. So, thank you.
Well, I'm kind of a Apple, Mac kind of a guy, and I have all the devices sitting here named, but I also have the income to afford it, to afford a premium product. And I'm actually therefore glad that there is also alternatives that can tend to be more competitive, so that some people with lesser income around the world are able to get affordable equipment. So for me, the question is not one or the other, but actually the two together are probably a pretty good combination. I would not want to have one drop by the wayside. Apple is able to develop some premium products like the smartphone, and they were the first, and that can really transform so many things in life, but then became also kind of widely accepted on the other platforms too. Both for the societal reasons of affordability and choice, and also for the reasons of technological innovation, competing against each other, you really wouldn't want to have one company being in control of the whole everything. This is a good system. Competition across platforms, competition within at least one of the platforms. Oh, I'm done.
Yeah, I'm not sure whether comparing Google and Apple brings us really forward in understanding media industries and more traditional media companies, because they have one thing in common, or two things at least. One is that they both own technology and understand pretty much of technology, which many media companies don't. They lack this knowledge and they don't even have access to technology. So, and what also makes them kind of similar is their strategic approach to media industries. At least in large parts, they are competing head-on with media industries. Unlike Microsoft, for example, that sees itself more as a partner, at least they pretend to be partners to media industries. I think when discussing openness and closeness, what you did going along this row of contributors. It's a difference whether you regard their business, whether it's based on proprietary solutions or not, or whether you regard how innovation happens in these companies. You can operate your business on the basis of proprietary solutions, but still be open when it comes to the innovation process. Now, let me just share some ideas with the more traditional media companies in the traditional media industries like publishing, broadcasting, and so on. What we see, at least in Germany, is that there's not a single strategy that runs across all industries. So strategies are very different across each of the industries, and even within the industries, you see very different strategies. Like in newspaper publishing, you still find consolidators. The sole innovation is identifying other publishers who suffer and taking them over. Others just scratch on, I would say, they just scratch the surface of innovation. They improve their products. That happens mostly in publishing. Very few indeed transform themselves and really work on their business models. And others are even more extreme. They have family-owned publishing businesses where the families think about just selling the publishing and running away and doing something else with the money. That's also a strategy, so they become family office and do something else. When traditional media companies think about investing or buying startups, which is also mentioned in the questions as one of the strategies, it's interesting to see that many of the incumbent media companies do not really invest in media-related startups. They rather invest in businesses going beyond media, commerce, health, and mobility. On the other hand, there are still media startups, but it's rather non-media companies investing in these media startups, automotive companies, for example. So there's a lot of dynamics going on, and I think it's a very interesting research topic that is really covered systematically, and I guess there are also differences when you compare different countries and world regions, or countries with similar economic strength or size. So much from my side for the time being.
Hi everyone, it's great to see so many friends again after all the time that we were kept at home. This time I'm not here as an academic, I guess, but as a professional in the television business, as I started my position as a board member for the public service media in Portugal 1 year ago. So what I'd like to give you is our experience in RTP, radio and television in Portugal, as with innovation, with open innovation, and what we are doing. So as all public service media companies, we are struggling. We came from a very healthy period of being monopolists and having granted public funds to having a fragmented audience, not only with commercial channels first, but now with over-the-top operators, and its audiences are really challenging right now. So, and also there is this big political discussion everywhere about public funding of public service media companies. So things are interesting, let's say. We are reacting to this, obviously. and in order to keep our relevance, we need to not only be innovative in content, which is part of our public service objectives, but also to be able to retain or to gain younger audiences, because everywhere public service media has the older audiences are still with us, the younger really are not really interested in the traditional programming that we used to have. So how are we reacting to this? So open innovation, in our case, is also related to content. So we, for several years now, we are investing a significant part of our budget in independent producers, Portuguese independent producers that bring new ideas, new formats, and we do co-productions with them. Some of them started really small, online only, in our proprietary platform, FTP Play, if you would like to check it out. We always appreciate audiences across the board. So they started small, and then after the formats are really well received by the market, we give them the space for the linear television, and we have quite well succeeded cases here. Also, we are updating our online platform. We have a proprietary platform. This is a big discussion internally. Should we only use that to distribute our content? Are we cannibalizing our own audiences for the platform if we have, if we are open to the OTTs, to Amazon Prime, to Netflix, and if we allow them to distribute our co-production content? These are really these are philosophical discussions, very interesting of course, but also there's this practical side, which is if we put content in international platforms, which are received everywhere all over the world, it's not important only for us as a company, but it's also important for the environment that we represent. The producers, the actors, the copywriters, everyone gets visibility. And this is quite important for the overall industry, the audiovisual industry in Portugal. So new formats for us are also very important online, with the esports segment, for instance, because young people at this time really enjoy online playing and not only online visualizing films or series. So we are also covering that and doing championships online or transmitting championships online using platforms that youngsters really like. So I would say this is an interesting time for innovation, and public service media are trying to react to that. More reacting than being trying to foresee the future, but still trying to be a part of the future.
Well, thank you very much for all your presentations. Basically, we have now completed this first question. If there are any interest from the audience, I would really appreciate very much indeed if you have any questions, comments that you would like to make. So I think we had a very good and informative panel. So this first question, open and actually closed innovation. When I mention open and closed innovation, just want to point out what Kaspar's mentioned, quite importantly actually. I didn't think only basically in business terms that I'm considering both business and technological aspect of closed innovation, but just the aspect that this segment of closed innovation really determines the way large companies functions, and Professor Ma mentioned that already, so that was very important to me. So please, if there are any questions or comments that you want to make in regard to this question, just go ahead and feel free to show. Okay. I think we exhausted the top of this question, so the colleague Kim can just go ahead and ask the rest of it. Thank you.
It's great to see you again here. And for question is regarding open process first and innovation model. And now it's time to move to. Okay, it's time to move to the second question. And when we, the media firms implement digital innovation, there should be two kinds of driving forces: technology pushing or the demand pull. Even though the customer's demand is so important, normally the digital technologies really matters. The second question is about the role or the influence of the technologies. How software or cloud or AI or the quantum technology influence digital media innovation? Maybe when you consider the business sustainability or the social value, they may impact positively or negatively. Thus, could you talk about the influence of those new technologies on digital media innovation? Maybe, okay, we can go in same order.
Okay, question two. So, I find that the very interesting thing about the influence of what I'll call digital lifestyle, something I write about in my research. When we think about the idea of software, we're talking about things like exchange efficiency. And the idea of certainly e-commerce. When you think about the impact that e-commerce has had in the last 15 years in terms of just the way we live, the way we work, the way we operate, the fact that it's had an impact in terms of bricks and mortar stores that we're no longer, that so much of now the way we shop is of course through what I call exchange efficiency in terms of software applications. When I think about the idea of, artificial intelligence, I think about human-computer interface design, how far we've come from the beginnings where we used to type in our commands to a computer to now where we now have simple voice recognition, or that when we go through, let's say, airport checkout, airport check-in, we use, of course, eye recognition in terms of facial recognition, things like that. When I think about the idea of human-computer interface, I think about personal digital assistants, the idea that in the future when we have so-called personal robotics, where we have somebody who we talk to, give it a name. If you think about Siri, when you think about names like, Alexa, now all of a sudden you start calling your own personal digital assistant by their specific name. And the fact that they can now answer questions in real time, much as you might if you just simply type in a question on Google. When I think about the idea of quantum technology, I think about things like speed and throughput. Now, quantum technology is still at very, very early stages of development, but I would argue that in the future it will have the impact on computing the way we have cloud computing is today. It is that important to the future. But we're probably 10, 15 years away in terms of really where it's going to be. Right now we're still very much in the development stage of quantum computing. But when you think about the future, you're really talking about an exponential increase in terms of speed. The fact that we can process questions that would now take a year to answer using the highest supercomputer, we can now do in a matter of minutes using so-called quantum technology. But again, it's still very much in the beginning stages of development. But I really think that's going to be a game changer when we think about the future of that kind of technology application. But all in all, I would say that really so much of really where we're heading towards is artificial intelligence. Because really we're just, again, really beginning to appreciate the fact that so much of what we're really talking about is the ability to provide AI technology to so many of the applications and things that we do now on a day-to-day basis. And it looks very, very interesting to say the least. I'll pass it on to Steve.
Thank you, Rick. I should start out by pointing out that when we're looking at software, the cloud, and AI, that these are really the foundations of Web 2.0. Right? That without cloud computing, without artificial intelligence, it's statistical applications that were developed really to apply high-speed computing. And without those two, the foundations for most of the services we now enjoy online would not exist. The App Store wouldn't function as it does. You wouldn't have things like Facebook. Google might exist, but in a much more primitive capacity. Social media in general really wouldn't be there. And so, really, in software, cloud, and AI, the software which is developed by the individual applications themselves to take advantage of the general purpose technologies that are cloud and AI, along with fast internet, right, are what makes possible what most of us spend much of our time doing today. When it comes to quantum technology, Ben gave you a much more in-depth discussion of that than I would, but I think of it in terms of modeling systems that are complexly and rapidly interacting in ways we can't do now. They talk about things like modeling the weather. Right? It's such a complex system that with computational capabilities we have right now, we can't put enough parameters into the system to give us accurate forecast more than, if you live where I do in Boulder, Colorado, more than about an hour out, although they claim more. Some places maybe a few days. And so, I mean, with enough and rapid enough computational technology, we can actually make the butterfly effect something that is manageable and addressable. And that's where I see it going. And so if we're looking at the interaction between people, that mass reactions to changes in the characteristics of software, then suddenly you can respond and with a rapidity that wasn't possible before. And so that's where I see that taking us. That's pretty much what I have to say.
So, let me try to go on saying this. First, we have to be clear about what we are discussing on the influence of the software or the cloud and so on. Because if you are speaking about journalism, it's one thing. If you are speaking about entertainment, it's another thing. And if you are speaking about general information about the buses or things like that, or the weather, it's definitely another thing. And if you are in Europe, which has journalism very highly regulated, because it's that idea, it's a pillar of democracy, then you have to look to these questions. And everything that has to do with licensing, with the possibilities of registration and paying the fees that are related to that. In Australia and Canada, a new way is being shown to us, differently from the one we have in Europe. And in Australia, I think that in 1 year we will have some answers to what is happening exactly to these questions. Because if you come to cloud, for instance, most of the people that I represent that I work with will ask me, okay, and what are your assurances on piracy? I don't want to use the cloud because I want to be sure of how much I am protected against piracy or counterfeitation or things like that. So it's indispensable that we define about what we are discussing here when you say what is the influence, for instance, of artificial intelligence. Are we speaking about the possibility of robots writing news, of substituting at least partially what the journalists have been done? So, what I really think is that in a country like Portugal, where you can have a journalist for less than 1,000 euros, but you cannot have an engineer that knows to do something about informatics for less than 1,500 euros. When you have this kind of decisions that you have to do, in fact, these are the ones that are considered first. These are the ones that have the real influence, and these are the ones that shows us that we have to know what we are discussing. At European level, we have in this moment one regulation, the SA, has this company. The second one next year, the IMMAA, the digital market and digital service tax. And we have the preparation of the MFA, the Media Freedom Act. So we have a lot of framework that 5 years ago no one would discuss or would have think about, that influence in a way that you could not think before. All the questions and all the discussions about what the second question rises. And then you have all the difference between all the members of the European community and again Australia, Canada and the United States that has developed in the last 3 years a total different approach of the approaches that we were used. I will finish saying that in the present discussions, in the present status of discussions of the directive of the copyright in Europe, what to say to my colleagues when they began discussing how should we monetize the value of the copyrights and so on. I always ask, you know, with what Google are you going to discuss in 4 or 5 years later if all the laws that have been discussed in the United States will be passed? What company will we have? Google, Meta, Amazon? What kind of company will we have in 5 years to discuss this with the big data for more than 15 years now? So, my answer to this question is that this is in fact the world that expects us. We have to answer these questions. And my view is with people like you that are in IMMAA permanently, that we have to count to at least know the way to answer these questions.
Coming back to your question of demand pull or technology push from the beginning, I thought about the paper I'm going to present today, so the publishing blog, advertising blog, on German virtual reality companies and how they approach the opportunity of the metaverse, whatever that may be, but so they have to position themselves. And we found that this technology push is preformed by demand pull if you don't have enough resources. And if I look at quantum technology, exponential technologies, I would ask myself, I mean, there are many usages, we heard about that, of course, for media companies who will really have the resources to work on those technologies. Or is it just on the application layer? So you're programming, you're learning how to do something on Alexa, but that doesn't make you very technology versatile regarding smart speakers. Do you apply the Google AI or different AIs and learn how to do it, or do you build up, like, have to use that own technology, exercise, IP, etc. And that's, if I look at quantum technologies and the numbers you read in the press that are involved for media companies, that's, for most of them, a number or two too large.
There is a lot of innovation in the digital area. But that is not to say that there is a lot of innovation in the digital and the media industries. In fact, I would argue that one of the delusions is that this is a very innovative industry. It's really not. And that's why companies such as Apple and Google and Microsoft and Spotify, those are not media companies. Those are tech companies that became media companies, or new companies that kind of went in sideways into the media industry. Because the fact is that the media industries tended to be, and I'm kind of a bit echoing what I've just told, they tended to be a bit fat and happy and well established, and they had good things going. And so not only were they kind of slow in adopting innovation, which is why these other companies had to come and become successful, because it was not the Bertelsmann or the Springers or the BBCs or the Globos or whatever in the various countries. Not only were they not at the forefront of innovation, and that's, by the way, kind of was not true in the beginning of electronic media. RCA in the United States was a major high-tech company, and it founded a media company called NBC. The only media company that I think has some kind of role in technology that I can identify is in Japan, NHK, which is the public broadcaster, which is missioned by the Japanese government to be kind of the coordinator of technology development. They contributed, but recently, of course, things kind of moved right by Japan, so they were not in the same leadership position as they were 20 or so years ago. Now, and I will expand the argument, saying that not only were media companies, as companies, not at the forefront of technology, but they were actually retarding it actively. Because one thing that media companies have is they have a lot of influence. And so when you go through the history of media, it is always the established media that have opposed the next generation. Print publishers opposed radio and private broadcasting until they got some share of the action. Television broadcasters opposed cable television. Cable television operators opposed satellites. And we can go on, and including one of the things that you see right now in Brussels, these kind of regulatory initiatives, think what they really kind of are part of an effort to retard the emergence of a worldwide, global, open, digital media system with all kinds of legitimate arguments. Like there's privacy and there's market power and there's this and that. But on the whole, there is a significant aspect of following the existing media and saying, well, wait, we, the Europeans, they're being overwhelmed by all this, and you can wrap yourself in a flag of Europe while retarding the emergence of these digital industries. And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with it, but there's a long tradition of established media organization trying to slow down the process. Now, you can see that you can measure this. Whereas in the IT sector as a whole, you remember Moore's Law and so on, as a compound annual growth rate of change in technology of 30, 40, 50%, depending on what sector you go, on the chips and the transmission, in everything. You have a kind of an enormous compound annual growth rate of about 40%. When you measure the compound growth and innovation rate in the television sector from its early emergence, which was kind of like late 40s, early 50s in practical terms, it was of course a little bit here and there before, but on the whole as a mass medium in the late 40s, early 50s, you can find a compound growth rate in terms of innovation of about 2 to 3 to 4% only. It's been extraordinarily slow. Black and white television persisted for a very long time, and then finally, after huge discussions across Europe and the world, they added color television. And then it kind of stayed with 625 lines forever and ever. And then after huge discussions, it became digital and it became high definition. Those are very slow processes, and they were partly because of the standardization process that was kind of absurd in its slowness. But it was kind of not really fought. The television industry was not fighting to make it more, the standards process more efficient and more fast, quite to the contrary. They were kind of usually happy with what they had. And the changes from one, for example, the changes to high definition meant that they had to get new equipment and all kind of stuff. And we don't get any new audiences anyway, so why do we bother with all this new stuff? And so, in short, to conclude, innovation in this media industry has always come from the outside, not from the inside. And it is therefore important to make it possible for new media organizations to emerge, because if innovation is what we're looking for, we're not going to get it from the established industry.
So I would like to further add something to Ile's point, which is in between the two questions, the question number one and number two. In fact, media companies were somehow open in innovation because there didn't happen much inside, so they had to open them to acquire innovation, which is not the worst strategy, to simply acquire, if at all. The thing is why many media companies still lack innovation on a more substantial level, going beyond products. It's because technology, I think, is what you said, Christian. Technology alone doesn't help. You need to understand your users. Otherwise, technology is useless. It's there, it's accessible, and that's another major shortcoming of traditional incumbent media companies. They did not understand their users. They did not know enough about their users. Now these two shortcomings come together, and the question is why didn't they understand their user? They didn't need to. There's a saturation, some complacency, and this brings us more to managerial issues. How do you turn around a company that was based on complacency and saturation and was happy to do so and generated profits over decades? How do you turn around such a company to an agile, dynamic, open institution? Which is not just about acquiring companies, it's about culture, organization, and a general attitude. So this is to add to question number one. Now more focusing on question number two, there's a range of technologies mentioned. I'm not sure whether all of them are relevant for media, and some might even be missing. Quantum technology is a technology that is good for tackling computationally hard problems. I don't really see such computationally hard problems at the core of the media industry. This might come in a decade or so. I rather see AI at the forefront of challenges, but media companies are still very reluctant in introducing them either on the product level towards their users, but even more so introducing them on the process level, improving processes, automating processes internally. Another strand, I think, that is very important but equally ignored by many are new user interfaces, virtual reality, artificial. Third, it's not mentioned here, blockchain technology in securing transactions, making transactions more transparent. I think these are the three major strands that will have an impact. But again, technology is useless if you don't know what to use it for, and without understanding the users and their needs and demands. Yeah, so much from my side.
So I'd like to cut my answer into three, starting by saying that I think that this digital media innovation starts with this content abundance era that we are facing. So now the struggle is the choice from whatever the area we want to study or consult. from the technical evolution that is now demanding much higher distribution and production way of doing things. And this sense of urgency that really demands for news, but also other content, entertainment content, to be available in a very speedy way. So, in order to obtain this, software, but also telecom networks, I would say, are critical. So we now connect areas that used to be separated in media companies. This has to be done in an almost immediate way. The sense of urgency is always there. Also, and something that was mentioned here, I think by Eleanor, was all that is now a big area of interest, which is, and is being very heavily studied by the European Commission, which relates to the rights. So we need to control licenses regarding software, but all the intellectual property rights regarding content production. And also to quantify and to know audiences. This is always based in software. In terms of cloud, obviously for the news and for entertainment production, we now have open with the cloud a degree of efficiency that was not possible before. We now can transmit pieces of news coverage in a very easier and also agile, like Asilas was mentioning, way. Television is evolving from a very heavy way of doing things to a very agile way of doing things without jeopardizing quality, because now any weaknesses in quality is much more visible in the eyes of audiences because of all the technology involved. And also, it's now possible for audiences to access an almost infinite portfolio of content. So now it's not only for current portfolio, but for legacy content that is being consulted, is being watched in a much broader, abundant way of doing things. So AI is becoming obviously a curator, I'd say, for having people locating easier in an easier way their preferred content, and so capturing audiences and going back again between relevant and having audiences with you. That's it from my side.
Okay, thank you for great comment. Let me just briefly summarize one comment. First of all, as you said, software, cloud, or AI, even quantum technologies are progressing the dimensions of the media business. And it's a kind of everyday life in media industry. But as earlier said, yes, it came from outside of media business. That's a kind of problem. But there will be a kind of butterfly effect, and there will be a kind of enormous effect from this kind of technology. And we can expect a kind of different influence of this technology in terms of old players versus new players. There will be retired effect for the established old media companies. That's a kind of tragedy, and tech companies may kind of beneficiary from this kind of technological advancement, and a kind of a different effect between European countries or US or Asian countries. like that. Okay, we can summarize like this, and I can invite some questions or additional comment from the floor. Anybody have a question or comment? Please join us with question or comment. Okay.
I do actually quite unexpectedly, I didn't expect to have a question, but taking into consideration our very complex actually dialogue here that we developed, and which I think is an excellent way to learn and to exchange information. I just want to point out a few words here in terms of the potential for research and in terms of when we juxtapose digital technologies, pure high-tech with the media technologies. We've been thinking within the old dictum which says that in media management, content is the king. We've been taught by our professors that content is the king, and most of the time now we teach our students that content is the king. In the digital universe, distribution is becoming increasingly important. It is actually perhaps 99% of the business that a successful company does that is doing distribution. The most powerful company in the world right now is not a Google and it's not Apple. It is Amazon, because it has the capacity to get as many information as possible. The way they filter information, no other company actually does. They realize that distribution is the kingdom, whereas content is only the king. And those that control the kingdom will be able to appoint the new king. That's at least my understanding. In terms of research potential, media is important because it spreads news, and that's why it's important. Media is always more important than it really is important, because it says it has a social effect. It has simply, this is why politicians like media. Did we ever think why politicians like media so much? Anywhere I go and travel, I see politicians on television. Did we ever think about that? Why do you like television? Well, simply because it tells you how the structure of power in one society is actually circulated and redistributed. And that's the role of the media that exceeds the economic side. In terms of economic side, media is not nearly as powerful as telecommunication business or as ICT business or quantum technology or information technology. It covers only 0.5% of the global research, which is very negligent. It's microscopic way of doing research, but it's highly influential. ICT covers 30%. It's 60 times more powerful. But ICT is only machine, and media is still a human being. And that's what I just wanted to point that out when I was trying actually to ask some of the questions. Thank you. So I agree with you.
Okay, any question from floor? Okay, please.
Hi everyone. I want to ask a new change in the media landscape related to people cutting the cable or the satellite television and just staying with the streaming of OTT content. Also, last night we were discussing about the Disney and Star Plus in Latin America, like add new kind of content, live content, sport content, and if you know there are going to be a very big impact in the media and television market, or anyone who can talk about in, I don't know, in the United States, Europe, or Canada.
Actually, that's closely related to the next question. But we can start to the next question. Okay, and we can skip.
Okay.
Okay. Kent Wilkinson from Texas Tech University. I'll try a question that maybe you haven't anticipated a future one. And it's related to something that Cristobal said, but also what President Lugano said earlier, and that is the generational aspect. I see, sorry if these are inaccurate, but I see baby boomers and maybe Gen Xers on the panel here, but I'm seeing an increasing gap between perspectives and some of the historical orientation that we have further on in our careers, and the students who are in our classroom. I see it with my own kids who are now in their 30s in terms of having cut the cable, using YouTube and streaming services for content, and not traditional cable or satellite. And I'm just wondering, mature as consumers as well as perhaps media scholars that might be on a panel like this in 20, 25 years.
Anybody can volunteer to answer? Okay, Steve.
And that's a really great question, and it's one the answer to will be figure out what people that are sitting in this panel looking like me in 20 years. Right? I think that's a really good question, of the fact that the younger generation has different types of consumption habits. And so more likely to look at things like YouTube rather than going to Netflix. And I suppose if you go far enough back, the old enough people, they'd be more likely to go to satellite TV. And you asked the question about a satellite. I think in terms of satellite, the satellite it has disadvantages in terms of latency and the cost of bandwidth that are giving it a disadvantage compared to fiber for terrestrial transmission. And so we're seeing, at least in the U.S., there is a transition underway from satellite to terrestrial fiber. Now, what does that mean in terms of the way we organize things? Well, it means you have a dramatically expanded amount of bandwidth, right? Because you're limited with, even though you can use compression, you're limited with satellite technology, and so we have to ask, what does that expansion of bandwidth do? And I'm not going to offer you an answer to that, but I think in terms of changing generations and changing consumption habits, that, I personally would hate to see the case that YouTube becomes a model or TikTok becomes a model for the media in the future. On the other hand, if it never goes that way, we're looking at the economies of attention. So this is a short attention technology. And you're looking at things that are on YouTube, maybe several minutes long, TikTok less than half a minute long. And it's a totally different type of consumption, a totally different kind of product that appeals to people that are looking in that way. There's definitely going to be some displacement. And if we have that kind of displacement, then we have smaller budgets for traditional media. And which has a ramifying effect of feeding back and further when amplifying the push towards non-traditional means of communication. So that's sort of the way I see things might develop.
Okay, we can naturally move to the next question. And as we discussed in the second question, we have to catch up the technological advancement. We need to cope with the influence of new technologies. And in addition, we need to satisfy new emerging customers like new generations and changing their needs or requirements. But why we need to respond to the technology or the demand of customers? We need to make money. The media firms, but it seems that they are so slow in reinventing or innovating the way of making money. The advertising model is so old-fashioned, but even though they have new business model or revenue model, it's not enough. Next question is about the way of making money. What should be the most recover innovative revenue stream for digital media? For example, will be streaming or live content? So please explain for us. Okay, let me repeat again. What should be the most applicable innovative revenue stream for digital media?
So I'm going to suggest that probably there are what we'll call, in my view, 5 important revenue streams for the future. They all exist currently with varying degrees of success. Certainly, we start out with the most obvious one, which is video streaming itself. Again, to your question, Christopher, it will have a very disruptive effect because effectively what we've seen already among younger people is that they have cut the cord. But you also think about that impact it's had on traditional industries like broadcast TV. When you have a network-affiliate relationship that, at least in the U.S., requires the use of traditional use of satellite communication. Now when you can stream everything, there's really no need for that kind of relationship, which made sense in the past. So now suddenly you're looking at a very disruptive effect of video streaming. Imagine a future in a scenario where there really is no need for a traditional broadcast network affiliate relationship, because there's nothing that the affiliates produce that's that important that the networks need at this point in time. So I think there's that important aspect of the disruptive effect. Think about also the mergers and acquisitions aspect. There's a lot of what I'll call the video streaming paradox, which is to say that there are so many different streaming services who now basically reinvented what Netflix knows how to do, that they're going to ultimately create a situation where you have to choose from so many different streaming services that it's cost prohibitive. So in order for that to make sense, they're going to basically create mergers between and among those existing streaming services, which I think will make it a little bit more affordable. So imagine a scenario where suddenly you have Hulu and Disney, of course, but then you could also have, a number of other services all combined under one, kind of like coming full circle in terms of what cable television used to be. So I think about that as one streaming service. I think about cloud computing. I think about the fact that when you think about Amazon, and Zebedon spoke to it very, very well, the issue is that, of course, there's the distribution side of it in terms of traditional e-commerce, but you probably are not appreciative of the fact that AWS, their cloud computing services, their second most important revenue stream that they have. Not as much is said about it, but it is hugely important to the success of Amazon and its president and CEO is from their AWS division. I think about virtual reality. I think about that as a revenue stream. Now, of course, we're thinking about, most often when we think about virtual reality, we think about it in the context of video games and the idea of future. But I'm going to talk about all the different ways that you can simulate. When you think about flight simulation, you think about medical simulation, you think about combat simulation, all the different ways that you can simulate in a different scenario. And a whole set of industries to be created around these different kinds of simulation effects that I think also represent the future of revenue insofar as we can use. Fourth, I think, would be, of course, internet search. That, of course, is probably the least, needs the least amount of explanation. But I would argue that when you think about general all-purpose searches such as Google, it is what it is. When you think about specialized searches such as WebMD, or my favorite, of course, is TripAdvisor, because, of course, there you have a very specialized search engine, but it does what it does. And there's a whole host of possibilities in terms of the future where I think that kind of revenue stream could go in the future. But we think about internet search, not so much general purpose, but specialized. And then the fourth, of course, where I talked a little bit before about robotics. And of course, I come back to my original concept about the human-computer interface design in the future, and the idea of personal digital assistants, and really just scratching the surface of what we mean. When we think of robotics, we think of robotics in terms of standalone figures. But I argue that robotics, of course, is really about software. It's all about the different ways in which you can simulate and create human-computer interface information exchange between people and computers, and what that represents. We see Siri, we see, of course, things like Alexa. That's really just the tip of the iceberg. That's just really the very first surface of where this is going to go. I'm talking about a future scenario where you're really talking about having a companion computer with you that can really answer questions on the fly in terms of mobility, in terms of mobile use, in terms of the ability to really have this kind of, if you will, AI companion with you wherever you go. So I'll stop there.
Well, my first inclination in responding to this question was to say yes to all above. That, yeah, I mean, there's a lot of different innovative revenue streams. VOD, video on demand, streaming, micropayments. Rick just gave us a bunch of others, and we don't know how this is going to.
Sitting in a group of 6 or 7 youngsters that were telling me what they knew about algorithm things. And there was a moment when I saw that all of them, they had better devices than I had. And I asked that, how do you manage to get them to buy them? Oh, our parents, because this is the way we learn. They have discovered that this is the way you learn, but you have to pay. Oh no, the school gives us Wi-Fi. And then I lived this. There is what they say, but I can't get the Wi-Fi. And the other answered, well, it's because the door of the classroom is closed. Open the door, please. And I said, they are fooling of me. They think I don't know that the door has nothing to do with the wire coming inside. And then they said, oh, don't do, because we have our own access. We don't need the access of the school, that the school is paying for us. We have our own access. And I'm sorry, it's very important to discuss all the things that we are discussing. But we have to understand how they happen, in fact, with the people that are using and the people that are accessing to these contents. So, what I do think really is that great change is that in the past, radio or broadcast everything, as it was a public authorization, it has rules. And those rules were pre-accepted by the broadcasters before they were broadcasted. Nowadays, the only rule is the rule of the user, is the rule of the access. I see where I want, where I want, and the way I want during the time I want. And there is the discussion, I'm sorry, when we talk about sustainability of the media, that really we have to do, is to understand that consumers change, and they change very rapidly.
Just adding on what you heard already, I think a large potential is in the synthetic media. So because we see that content scales the distribution, it's limited, and then content costs become a headache, as Netflix is finding out and others are finding out. But content production doesn't scale, except there are some applications. If you look at gaming, there the production does scale. And if you look at how the revenues have increased, so with the streaming, if you will, so some 20, 30, 40 billion dollars worldwide, but at the same time, gaming has grown twice or thrice. So there you can see, if you really solve the production problem, that's what we heard at the beginning. If you think about virtual reality, where you could technically create everything out of thin air, that has a large potential. And the second thing, which is relational, and going to your question about changing media habits, it's conversational media. If you look at TikTok, so you don't only have these videos which are produced in a traditional way, more or less. You also have conversational media. So the live streams on Twitch, which is a form of media consumption where people just watch people who don't have a show even, who might even not play a game and you will watch along. They're just staring at the comments and they're just conversing like talk show radio. So this is also, it doesn't totally solve the production problem like gaming does, it goes in the same direction. So I guess these are both interesting avenues for further reference.
The question was about innovative revenue streams. And I can talk about it, and I will talk tomorrow about metaverse. But in some ways, it's perhaps useful to talk about whatever happened to the old revenue stream. Because this is an industry information products and delivery of information products, which has become increasingly competitive, not everywhere, but on the whole, in a secular type way, become more competitive than it was used before. It's also an industry, so in competition, economists will tell us that the price will go towards long-run marginal cost. And that long-run marginal cost here is extremely low. The fixed costs are high, but not the marginal cost. And so in a competitive environment, you can drive down prices continuously to levels that are economically not sustainable. You will not be able to recoup the fixed cost. And that's one of the things that has been in fact happening. It's become cheaper and cheaper to produce bits of information, and I would say information, I mean also media, content. It's become increasingly cheap to produce these bits of content. It's become increasingly cheap to deliver those bits of content. And when you put these things together, you would think that there is no economic future for an industry, for this content industry and content delivery industry. There are, however, two strategies in this situation, at least two that I can think of immediately. One of them is to differentiate the product by innovation. So innovation is not an extra. Innovation is really it. Otherwise, because the traditional areas will not sustain the company anymore. The second, if innovation doesn't do the job, then establishment of market power, monopoly power. In the media industry has historically been pretty good about doing that in various forms of cartels and otherwise. But that becomes also more difficult as technology makes it difficult to sustain a monopoly, plus you have governmental operations in Brussels and Washington, etc., that are essentially trying to stem monopoly power. But those are the two strategies, that either monopolize or die, or innovate or die. And I'm not quite sure what the alternatives are.
I would like to take up again the point that was made on the generational issues. It's not new that younger generations consume media in different ways than older generations. But there's I think, a quite substantial difference today in what happened in the past. It's not just that they consume different content, which is logic somehow. They are in different phases of their life. Also, the producers of this content are different. This content is owned by different people and controlled by different institutions. So there is it's not just a divergence, there's really a gap growing. And most incumbent media are completely losing this generation, which questions their sustainability. So they are sustainable as long as there are enough of the older generation. There's a big advantage in Central Europe, at least, that there's so many of my age and we will all live longer. But if you completely lose out and miss this younger generation, you can't be sustainable. And I see very few of the incumbent media companies really tackling this problem. And it's not just solved by adding additional content. Just to give you an example, content creators' influences are largely ignored by incumbent companies. They might be invited to talk shows, but they produce content that is very important, very valuable in a way that it creates awareness among the young. They consume it if we like it or not, if we think it's stupid and not of the same quality. It's consumed and it takes much of their media consumption time across the day. So I think this is something that media companies and we as media management scholars have to take into account, that it's different today. It's not just different content, it's different institutions, different institutions controlling them. And this also is something I think Luisa was referring to the public service media. They also have this problem. There's no link anymore. They lost contact to the younger generation. They have no clue of addressing them with appropriate media. And that's why they increasingly, I guess in many of the European countries, in Germany in particular, this discussion on the public value, public service media actually produce is flaring up again. Do they really produce public value? Do they produce it in an appropriate way? And what about the other traditional media and the new ones? Do they also produce public value? You mentioned this aspect of society value addressed on your sheet, on your briefing sheet. I guess that's what you were referring to.
Sure.
But I have no answer to this question I asked myself. Maybe you have an answer to this one.
I'll do my best. Thank you. So regarding the young generation, and try not to take it too personally regarding the age of the panel or the participants. Yes, we are seeing that not only the new generations prefer the aggregation model instead of the linear model where someone chooses for them. They prefer to choose for what they want to watch. But also they have different preferences. For instance, now because of Qatar, the World Championship, young people, we have recently received studies that show that young audiences do not want to see the overall games, with the exception probably of their own national team. They want to see the overviews because they don't have the patience to wait for 90. When Castells was saying that we are a little bit lost, the public service media in this case, but also the traditional media, including commercial ones, in what the new generations want. We are trying to get there. We are experimenting, trying to create community fans, trying to put content in TikTok, trying to raise awareness of a certain type of content for them to come to us to reach that type of content. So they already know what they want to watch when they come to our programming. They are looking for that content. And this also relates to what Svesna was saying regarding who prevails, distribution or content. And this raises a very important question, which is if there are available alternatives in terms of distribution players, then content certainly would have a much heavier weight. If there are only a certain players for distribution, which by the way also have the budgets for massive investments in content, massive investments in content, then it will be obviously difficult for content providers to be the rulers here. So I'm not sure if the ones that are from outside or no, but right now in the European community we are having huge discussions about the digital terrestrial television, because this is the free way to get, and our friends from Spain know the importance in Spain of digital terrestrial television, because they have almost 50 channels available there, and this is the way to distribute, for distribution not to be the really main factor here. Because there is this strategy from telecom operators to diverge the spectrum allocated to DTT to mobile communications. And this would be in most of the public service media a catastrophe, to be very clear. Regarding business models, just a short answer. I know that we are facing time scarcity here, but I agree with Steve. So the different business models imply audience segmentation. We need to understand how much they are willing to pay, and then to give something more to the ones that are willing to pay more. That's what it is.
Okay. Well,
There's a question.
okay. Okay, we are running out of time, but we have our question.
I think we should perhaps, because both of them are rising at the same time, so I don't know. We don't have much time. I don't know, but we are just.
But we have enough time. Okay, we have to listen.
Very brief, so just very.
Okay, thank you so much for all the speakers. We are talking about business sustainability. Sustainability is a word that we use from some years, very few years ago. And I would like to ask if you have any thought about how sustainability is really changing media management. And is there any different aspect for media management and even being scholars that we have to teach something different since before, just because we are in a world where sustainability has to be in everywhere? And I would like to hear from you. Thank you.
I would say sustainability first is economic, so but I think you didn't mention that. I think the most important sustainability issue for the media industry is maybe preserving the sustainability of the political system. So it doesn't have something to do with the ecological aspects, which are also very important in educating the public and whatever. But I guess here is the important. We talked about innovation, and you said that there are media startups. But when you look at media startups, these are not journalism startups. These are advertising technology startups, other startups. And so that's, I guess, it's really, in the end, as Christian says, that's why the media industry is important, because of its impact and ecological and everything, but mostly political. And I guess that's even in terms of sustainability the most pressing issue in the US, in Latin America, in Europe, everywhere you go.
Terrifically interesting, Sydney. I think a lot of the discussion hinges on what we understand by media. So are we thinking about media as the media industries as we knew them? Do we think of companies like Amazon and Apple as media companies? Well, in the broad sense, they're not, but they certainly have elements of their business that are media related. And I had a couple of observations about streaming that I wouldn't mind getting some thoughts on. Netflix in the UK, the most watched content on Netflix UK is Friends. And not only is Friends the most watched content, the number of people who watch Friends on Netflix is higher than the next 9 programs that are in the top 10 combined. So that suggests to me that in terms of audience preferences, maybe it's not as epochal a shift as we may be assuming, or at least there's certainly a market there for the sort of content that is classic broadcast television content, which is Friends. The other shift, of course, is that Netflix will very shortly be having an advertiser content tier, and I would predict all streaming services will go down this path because, of course, they thrive in a world of near zero interest rates, considerably lower energy and petrol prices than we now have, and low inflation. In an environment that is high inflation, high energy prices, etc., people are going to cut back on something, And one of those things they're likely to cut back on is their expenditure on streaming services. So we're therefore seeing the streaming services going back, in a sense, into a more traditional media model of advertiser funding. Would speakers like to comment on that?
Well, thank you very much, Professor Hu. I understood this also more as a comment, right? Or the issue we have, the only problem we have here actually is the time. Everything else we're running very well. I think because we have 5 minutes more, but would that be possible to have a couple of minutes more, because we've got 1 hour and 45 minutes for lunch. It seems to be way. Can we take a few minutes just in the case? Yeah, I will be as fast and efficient as possible here. Another question here is actually one that is really important. It's mostly economic and business questions. So for the colleagues that come dominantly from journalism, actually communication studies, this may not be that much interesting, but nevertheless, I think that all business questions in a way are very tangible to any aspects of academic business that we do. So the question here is actually that I would like to ask our panelists is the impact of long-tail economics, software versioning, media content repurposing, inorganic mergers and acquisitions, vendor lock-in strategies on digital media revenue streams. Because we have very little time, we don't have to cover all of these strategies. You can select individually, perhaps 1 or 2, and try to provide a very brief answer. Thank you.
All right, so there's 7 things I want to talk about. No, I'm just kidding. So I think I'm just going to, because for the sake of time, I'm just going to focus on 2 issues. One, of course, is software versioning versus what I'll call software visioning, because they're really, in a sense, opposite ends of the same spectrum. So when you think about software versioning, you think about Microsoft Office. How many more versions can they create? That's really going to be substantially better, different than what they already have. So they're now at a point where they realize they plateaued. Not fully, but for the most part. So now you have Microsoft versioning, where now instead of creating a service that they, a product that they can give you to put on your computer, they now give you subscriptions. Because that's the only way to sustain that type of software application so that it makes sense going into the future. So that's where you've got like what we'll call incremental innovation. In contrast, of course, the same company, Microsoft, is looking at the future of Meta. And so, of course, hence the reason for the name change itself, because that's really where the future lies, because now they're talking about disruptive technology. And that's an altogether different value proposition than the other. So when you think about it, I think of it as software versioning versus software vision for the future. The other one I think I'm going to just talk about very briefly is what we'll call vendor lock-in strategy. Because there, I think it's kind of an interesting idea. I don't know how much you appreciate cloud computing, but when you think about a company whose all their data is on somebody else's cloud, that's a huge proposition, and that's a huge deal. If a company decides that they're going to go away from AWS and convert to another cloud computing service, that's a huge, substantial requirement for a company to change all its software to another company. So in a sense, once they start with somebody like AWS, Netflix being one of those examples, it's a hard thing to change over to something else. Let me give you a variation on that. So on a very personal level, I'll tell you about my own experience when it comes to AT&T. I have AT&T email. So now my wife basically has set up our situation where a lot of our bills are paid through her contacts through AT&T email. But if we ever get dissatisfied with AT&T, which we do periodically, think about all the companies I'm going to have to contact and change in order for me to be able to change my email structure so that I can then do direct deposit, things like that. So that's an example of where you're really kind of locked in. And then, of course, my third example would be Apple itself. When you think we started this conversation about open versus closed systems, Apple is the ultimate vendor lock-in computer. Am I going to really seriously think about a change in one of those technologies if I'm going to just say, yeah, I feel like something altogether different computer? So we think about Apple in terms of a closed system. It's very deliberate, and it's very much part of that vendor lock-in strategy. It's not to say that you can't do it, but it's hugely inconvenient to do it. And I think that's, again, kind of coming full circle to where we first started with the opening question. It really is about a closed system, and the value to Apple is keeping it closed that way, which isn't to say that there are a huge number of software apps, as Steve pointed out, but it's to say that basically when talking about the core technologies, it's very much a vendor lock-in strategy.
I'm going to speak a bit to the notion of the long tail, which is what your fourth question was. And it's, when Chris Anderson came out with this, Wired magazine, and later with the book, it was really compelling. And I taught the logic of the long tail, the logic of the fact that when you create a digital service, shelf space costs almost nothing. And so it's not a constraint for margin how much variety you have, and therefore you add more. And more people, I mean, because more variety is available, people consume less of those in the fat head of this distribution, consumption distribution. And it was attractive to a lot of people. A lot of business models, new business models were developed around long tail strategies. And to my knowledge, these by and large have not proven to be very profitable. And we need a lot more empirical work on the logic as well as the consequences of the long tail. Now, I've done some work on the logic. Anita Elberts, an economist, has done work on looking at the distribution of music tastes or music consumption as we move from to Spotify, Pandora, and so forth, as opposed to buying things from your local record store. And it turns out that if you're looking at the concentration of consumption at the head, right, that's actually gone up. The notion that the tail will become fatter and the head will become thinner, at least in music, has not been borne out empirically. Now that may be because there are dynamics in terms of consumption influences for online services that you have sort of network effects where I recommend to my friends that I like something, they like it, they recommend to their friends. And so you have these chains of sort of, I suppose, the digital equivalent of back fence recommendations that feed on each other and lead in one direction. That could be the reason. So Chris Anderson may have overlooked something. But then we can ask, well, it's one thing to say, is the tail fatter than it used to be? We can also ask, is the tail longer than it used to be? In other words, we have more shelf space, so is there room for differentiated content that appeals to really small audiences that which we didn't have room before? Question we haven't asked. We also haven't asked whether the stuff that is in the long tail used to be served in a different way. Before we had Spotify or online music services or whatever, we have record clubs. And so you can subscribe to a record club and you can offer a menu of selections that may not have been mainstream. Or I used to subscribe to Flying Fish Records. I used to have the catalog, and if you're interested in bluegrass, and especially of the obscure bluegrass musicians, you could find it. I'm not sure how much time we have. I have more I could say on this because I've done some work on it, but I think I should help it pass it on to the morning.
Excuse me, I just want to point out that we have several sessions on these topics. So you can find, if you're very interested, you can find actually in the conference program on business models. So just, I think that we're running out of time. And once again, I really would like to thank all the participants and apologize